was 4. I last left you off at the part of my story where the doctors talked my parents into giving 4-year-old me a clitorectomy surgery to remove most of my clitoris, which is what they told my parents, but in actuality, they removed all of my clitoris. Now, how did we even get here? And that's really difficult for anyone to answer, but I'll try. So, we live in a society that is really invested in clinging on to outdated and rigid concepts of gender as a binary. We live in a society that defines gender as only 2 opposing opposite categories. So if a child is born with a penis, we then assume they also have XY chromosomes, male reproductive organs on the inside, and will grow up to express a masculine gender identity. And if they don't, our society and the people in it punish that person to make sure they fit and stay put in that box. Now, the same happens for people who are born with a vulva and what we assume to also be a vaginal canal and a clitoris, and on the inside, female reproductive organs and XX chromosomes. We assume that these people also will grow up to express a feminine gender identity in line with their female sex. And when these people don't grow up to meet our expectations, society and the people in it also punish them to make sure that they're pushed back into that box. These punishments look like calling girls tomboys. They get called dykes. There are times when people attempting to use rape to correct lesbians. And some of the punishments that happen to men are getting called a sissy or a fag, getting picked on and bullied to make sure that they embody that masculine gender identity that we demand our children born with penises express. Okay, so all that to say, this type of society that we live in that has rigid, outdated definitions of gender as 2 and only 2 opposing, opposite, black and white categories that literally never overlap unless you're having heterosexual sex. And these 2 opposing forces are what kind of drive our society. And I do this, but it should be like this, because the people that we ascribe masculine gender identity and who fulfill that identity generally have more power in our society, right? And so they get to be up here a lot. So anyways, enter intersex children into this scenario. And to do this, you have to go back to 1950s with a doctor who is known sort of as the father of intersex surgery. He was a Hopkins University psychologist and sexologist who believed that physicians had legitimate authority to make intersex children's genitalia match the assigned gender identity to them. This is real. Then this way of thinking unfortunately became ubiquitous with intersex treatment and care in the US and all over the world. So that's the 50s. I was born in 86. So 36 years later, I, an intersex child, was born. The doctors immediately did some tests and discovered that I had internal testes, XY chromosomes, but on the outside I appeared female because of my condition, androgen insensitivity syndrome, which is insensitive to androgens like testosterone. So my body never kickstarted to the masculinization process on the outside, but still remained masculine on the inside. And so since all babies begin development in the womb as female, my body stayed female even after birth on the outside, but on the inside remained quote-unquote masculine. In the 50s, Dr. John Money comes along, who believes doctors should be doing surgeries to make our genitalia match our assigned gender identity. 36 years later, from that time in the 50s, I'm born. Year 1, they get rid of my undescended internal testes. It has no place in a girl like me because they really want me and my family to believe and get invested in this idea that there is only 2 genders and 2 sexes, and I was the one that was supposed to be female and grow up to be a woman, and there's no place for testes. So they didn't even tell my parents I had testes. They said I had underdeveloped ovaries, which they then called gonads. And they said, Mr. and Mrs. Pigeon, we need to get rid of these gonads quickly, because you know what? They'll become cancer one day, and we are so sure they'll become cancer. You must let us do this surgery right now before she even turns 1. So what do my parents do? They let me get that surgery because they want me to be healthy and to grow, and to live. So that surgery happened when I was 1. But 3 years later, I'm 4 years old, right here in the city of Chicago, at Children's Memorial Hospital, now known as Lurie Children's Hospital. I was in the hospital again, and this time I came out from that surgery without a clitoris. Now, this is where everything gets really messed up. When I first read this in my medical records, that they gave me straight on the paper a clitorectomy when I was 4 years old, I literally lost my mind. I lost faith in humanity. I couldn't grasp what I had just read. And you might be thinking, how did you go through your life not even knowing you didn't have a clitoris? I was 19 at the time when I got my medical records. And the answer is simple. We live in a society that's really invested in the make-believe of a binary gender system. I bought in to the feminine gender side and the female world of who I thought I was and supposed to be. And I would read women's magazines. And these magazines would always tell you it was very hard to find your clitoris, especially for your partner. They would always say like how to help your boyfriend find your clitoris. And other articles just about how to help you as a woman find your clitoris. Because I also grew up pretty ashamed of sexuality and ashamed of my body, I didn't do a lot of searching for the clitoris. And I just assumed when I did and I didn't find it, like the magazines had said, it was just hard to find. And so I was like, okay, everything's cool, right? And that, coupled with the immense amounts of shame I had about my body, kind of led me to being 19 and not even knowing for sure if I did or did not have a clitoris, even though I always suspected I didn't. So I really grasped onto the denial factor of all that and was like, no, I must have a clitoris. These magazines say it's hard to find. It's hard to find. And so, yeah, I'm sitting there, I'm 19, I'm in my college dorm room at this point, really small, cinder blocks all around. I closed the big heavy door and I locked it, and I sat down with my medical records for the first time, and I discovered the truth of what had happened to me. And to this day, it really upsets me. It really makes it hard to trust anybody, especially doctors, but even people who I know love me and want no harm for me. I find it hard to trust them too. It's hard to trust your parents, even though I love them, and even though I see how they were caught up in this systematic erasure of intersex people, it's hard to trust them. And when you can't trust your parents, it's really hard to trust anybody else. So yeah, that's how we got to me being 4 years old, and medical clinicians talked my parents into giving me a clitorectomy. So how did they do that, actually? They are slick. They told my parents, hey, guess what? We have seen your daughter and her clitoris is a little big. Hey, remember we took out your child's gonads before because they were going to turn into cancer? We got another idea. We noticed your child's clitoris is a little bit more robust than other little girls. And you know what? We can take care of that. And we have these new nerve-sparing techniques that are just the latest and the greatest. And we can take your daughter's clitoris and say, this is the clitoris, Mr. and Mrs. Pigeon, and we can go around and get rid of all the extra robustness, and we can get rid of that stuff and take out a little bit of the middle right about here and connect the top to the bottom, making the clitoris much more feminine in appearance. I don't know why my parents let them do that, but they did. And today, I am now 30, and it's been, 26 years since that happened. And this is the crux of intersex oppression. This is not the only thing. There's a lot to intersex oppression, but this, to me, in my story, this is the most oppressive, most offensive, most dehumanizing, horrible, messed up thing the medical industrial complex has done to me and to millions or hundreds of thousands of people like me. So if you're watching, I beg you to not only get educated about intersex, which is what you're doing right now by watching this video, but to take a stand, to become an ally to us, to become a comrade, and to work in solidarity with us. And I say that knowing that in order for that to happen, we as an intersex community also need to take a stand, and we need to work in solidarity with everybody out there too, especially people of color who are fighting for justice, liberation, and their lives. So we have a lot of work to do, and my goal is that the intersex community understands that there's huge overlaps between the history of violence directed towards people of color, from Tuskegee syphilis experiment that was non-consensual against poor black folks in the South, to Henrietta Lacks that involves the medical community taking her cells, she died of cancer, and taking her cells and reproducing them, and in fact keeping her alive for decades and capitalizing off of that without getting her consent or her family's consent, to the history of mass sterilization of black and brown women. So we have these overlapping histories of state-sanctioned violence against people of color and intersex people. And it's time, as an intersex community movement, that we fought and struggled in solidarity with these other movements, especially movements that are fighting for black and brown lives, like Black Lives Matter. So, till next time. Oh, and don't forget, intersex stories, not surgeries. Next week's episode, you're gonna get to learn about my vaginoplasty when I was 11 that I also did not consent to. You can get the shirt I'm wearing on my Etsy shop, which is linked below. Shout to Maya in LA for ordering this shirt.